Hey there, Techno Masters. This is chapter 3 of our short WordPress plugin series. In this one, we're going to be covering custom post types. Okay, so next up, let's look at custom post types, because obviously we've got the classic WordPress posts and different plugins may utilize different types of post. For example, WooCommerce uses product as a custom products as a custom post type. LearnPress uses courses as their custom post type. And there's many other applications for this. And you could use this when you're creating events, portfolios, whatever different custom need that your client may have. We're going to look at how do we create custom post types. We're going to look also how do we create taxonomies for those custom post types. We're going to look at adding meta boxes so that we can actually expand what that post looks like for custom details around this post type. And then we'll look at how to show up all the right columns inside of the kind of sort area for that, as well as to make them actually sortable. So before we start, let me show you a quick example of what we're doing. So in this one, we have the default post types, and I've gone ahead and created this custom post type called books. And inside of it, if we go into it, we can see that there's this meta box that I've got here is the additional one, and that now includes an author name and an ISBN. And I've also got this genre here for the different genres I may want, and that comes from my taxonomy that's been created. And added to this, I can not only create new books and manage them, I've got the columns for these ones, and I'm also able to sort in folders of them. Now, I've only got one entry here, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense to look at that, but you kind of get the gist of it. So the function we're going to use to create our post types is simply called the register_post_type. Now, that takes a few parameters, so let's kind of break those down quickly so we have an understanding of them. By default, we're passing 2 parameters into it. These essentially are the labels. In other words, what is the existing references that we use currently as posts, such as the title, the names, and what are we going to name that instead? And then the attributes, which are really the conditions. So are these publicly searchable? So to be very specific, some of the arguments that we're going to pass in are the public key, which whether this is actually visible or not on the front end and admin area, publicly _queryable, whether we can actually query it in the front end, show_UI menu to basically say if it's actually going to be visible in the admin area in the menu options, query vars as a boolean, whether we can actually set up queries for this to enable query var on custom queries, rewrite, which is essentially the custom URL slug if we want to use that, capability types, in other words, do we inherit another post type's capabilities, such as the post. We can also, out of that, inherit pages and the attachments as an example. Has _archive, that basically gives us like an archive page, the same as we have for posts. Hierarchical, either being a false or a true. In a sense, if it's false, it basically means we get hierarchies the way that we do with normal pages. Menu position, where we want this to show up inside of the menu. Usually the default here is 5, which is kind of where we see the current posts. We can pass in an array type of what it supports. And those would be, for example, title, editor, author, thumbnail, excerpt, trackback, custom fields, comments, revisions, post attributes. Very specific to if we're passing in the post type specifically for it. Okay, so let's kind of look at that in action. So I've got my first callback here, which I'm firing off on the init. And this is me just registering the post. So essentially what I'm going to be doing here is I'm first going to define the labels. So the labels are essentially the inherited qualities of the post type meta that I'm going to be referencing, almost like your translations. So where, for example, by default, the post types would be posts, I'm going to create the name and I'm going to make it books. Okay. And the singular name for it would be book. The menu name, books, so on and thus forth. You kind of get the drift. So essentially, I'm taking the core parameters related to that, and I'm just redefining it. So it basically has what you would see, but with your own kind of naming conventions. So instead of new item or new post, I'm going to say new book, edit book, so on and thus forth. Now, once I've got my labels array defined, I'm going to simply pass that array, or that labels array, as the very first key, as the very first argument inside of my actual arguments array, because I'm really just passing 2 things into it. Number one, when I register the post type, I'm passing in the name, and then I am passing in the actual argument. So the arguments contains those labels. Now, and this is where I'm defining all those items that I mentioned: public queryable, show UI, show us menu, all the way down. And most of these are going to be essentially booleans, except for rewrite, which is an array. And that would be my pattern for my custom type. So if I'm going to have my post name, I'm just passing in the slug that I want here for the rewrite, and that is I want book instead of the default posts or something. All right, capabilities, I'm going to inherit the capabilities of the posts type. Has archive, I want to show this so I can show all books on this page as mentioned. And then menu position again, 5. Anything below that will kind of show further down. Anything higher will show higher up. All right, and then what I wanted to support the thumbnail feature, the visual editor, and the title. Now, again, you can find a list of these things inside of the WordPress documentation, but these are the most that you're really going to need to get started. And that's it. That's all it takes in order for you to register and set up a side menu. Now, obviously, it gets a little bit more involved in that. This gives me the ability to create a custom post type. And just by doing that alone, my custom post type will appear, which was the books that we saw earlier. But obviously, I want to have more functionality into that. So the next thing I'd like to add is my taxonomies. Now, again, the beauty about taxonomies is I can create them and make them available to different post types. So I can make my taxonomies available to the existing post if I wanted to, or I can make them specific to just the one I'm working through. So when I'm defining taxonomies, there's essentially 2 types, hierarchical and non-hierarchical. So hierarchical is parent-child relationships, and non-hierarchical is pretty much flat categories. So hierarchical can be kind of like your normal categories inside of posts, whereas flat would be more like tags. So obviously these can be things like books or book genres like we're using. But I mean, if you're creating events, these could be event types. If you're creating products, these could be product categories, and so on and thus forth. So let's register a taxonomy. Also, very simple and straightforward. Again, we're passing in the labels. That's the very first thing we're going to handle, and it's very much the same as what we did before. A little bit of differences in the core ones. Besides the naming ones, we're also updating the edit, update, add new titles, and then we are defining the menu name of what exactly is this taxonomy going to be called. Once we've got our labels out of the way, we're passing in our arguments. Our arguments here are pretty simple. As we mentioned, hierarchical, is it like the categories example that we mentioned, or is it like the flat? So hierarchical is either going to be true or false. So false if you're looking for a flat list. We're going to pass our labels in, and then it's again, do we show it in the admin interface? And show admin columns, do we have those columns layout so I can actually work through it? Show UI, in other words, does it actually show up inside of the admin UI? Show admin columns, in other words, when we look at the table of that list of posts, of our post type, does it show up there? Is it available for that area? And then query vars, can we do custom queries for? Can we do query vars on its custom queries? And then again, the rewrite. So here, again, I'm passing in the slug, and I want to change that slug to genre. All right, and that's it. There, I just simply have to register _ taxonomy. That's the function that I'm calling here, and I'm passing it the name of my taxonomy, an array that essentially says which post types I want to attach it to. So if I want to add it to posts and to my new custom post type, I would pass that in as I would have books, comma, whatever other post types I want this included on as well. And then finally, my arguments. Okay, so registering a taxonomy, registering a post type, very, very simple and straightforward. Now, obviously, we want to add some meta boxes inside of that. Now, the beauty about the meta boxes is we can decide where we want to actually place them in the view. So we can say, for example, we want them in the normal context where it's showing up beneath our main area, or we can have it in the sidebar, or we can have it in advanced, which will be lower down and further in another kind of area. And we can also then define the priority as in where that shows up, especially if we're working with other post types, but specifically on our own, of course. Because again, we don't just have to create post meta types for our own custom types. We can also create these to fit into the existing post types that are there, even if that is from another plugin. Just please remember, if you are going to do something like that, do make sure that you're checking the existence of that plugin before you execute your code. Otherwise, you're going to get into some failures and potentially get your plugin disabled. Firstly, there's a few things I need to keep in mind here. So not only do I actually have to register my meta box inside of that page structure, I also then need to render my meta box, and then finally any kind of functionality on my meta box, such as managing the saving and update of the data in there, that I have to manage. So anytime you're creating a meta box, you've essentially got those 3 steps that have to be defined. So let's look at them one by one. So the first one here, I've got my add meta box, which is the hook that I'm filling into, and I'm going to create my meta box. Now, as I mentioned here, essentially when we're looking at defining the meta box, there's essentially just this add _ meta _ box is essentially the function we're going to use to register the meta box. So the first thing we're doing here is we're giving it a unique ID, right? So this is a unique name for our meta box. The next thing we're doing is we're giving it a title on what it wants to render. Then, once we've got that, we're passing in the callback function. This is the thing that's going to be responsible for actually rendering the layout, the way that thing looks, and any behavior that's supposed to be there with it. And then the post type of where this should be appearing. The context, and again, we got these three options: normal, side, and advanced. And normal essentially is the main content window, side is the sidebar, and advanced is below normal. And then finally, the priority. So this will just be the priority of execution, very similar to how we pass in priorities normally with the normal WordPress hooks. Okay, so now that I've got that set up and registered, I've registered my box. Now I've actually got to go and handle the rendering of that. So that's really just my HTML. So inside of this, again, good practice, making sure I kind of generate a nouns inside of that. Now, what's different from us generating the nouns here versus us having previously created nouns in one of our own custom fields when we were working on shortcodes, there we kind of aligned that to a variable which we then passed in through our form as a hidden input. Here we don't really have to do this because remember, this is going to be rendering inside of the page, which is technically already a form. So instead, I'm going to be using the WP underscore nouns underscore field to generate a field inside of that form, and I'm going to pass in my callback method, essentially, that's going to be listening for that, and then the actual kind of key name of the noun so I can reference and check if that exists. So all I'm doing here is I'm kind of gathering some information because I'm going to define, for example, an author and an ISBN. Now, I want to make sure that I'm marrying that information to my post data. So because of that, I want to get the post meta of the actual post ID to firstly see if I've already saved this. Because again, I'm going to save this data against the post metadata of that post type. So I want to make sure that I've already got, if that is already available, so I can just show that to the user. Otherwise, I'm going to save it when I get it. So all I'm doing here, I'm just using the post metadata against the ID, and I'm looking for the key that I would be saving later on, and I'm passing in a true because I can either get that as an array or as a flat value. So I'm looking for a flat value, I'm just looking for the string, so that's all I want to get here, and I'm assigning that to a value. And then I'm just putting it inside of my output, and I'm making sure that I'm kind of matching that convention that I've got here. So here is my same kind of value for the post meta that I want to save, so I could check against those fields. And there is my value. I'll put it, and again, I'm using escape attributes just so I don't get anything funny coming back to me. And if we look back at our UI and we look at our form, that now is going to give me this. So that alone is already giving me this value because I've already kind of tested this beforehand and saved those values out, and that's it. But now the logic to actually save that, because we've got to hook in when this form kind of gets submitted. So we've got a balance in there for some good submission, but that alone is not going to be enough to know what function to call. So what we're doing is we're hooking on the save post action hook. So because I'm listening on the save post action hook, now that'll fire off my information with the post ID that I'm passing into it. And now I can do my security checks. So because this is a submission, this is not an AJAX handling, the first thing I'm checking out here is just for the nouns, making sure that's there and it's been verified. All is good. If it's not verified, I'm just going to send it back. I'm not going to do anything. I also want to maybe just do a little bit of an automatic thing. Is this an auto save? Because I don't necessarily want to do something on an auto save, or maybe I do, so I can handle that. That's really up to you. I might want to check user capabilities. Again, you never know. Just be safe. And then I'm just simply going to go and check for the presence in that post of the data that I'm getting. Because remember, there's a form submission happening. Hence, we've got the save underscore post. So I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to get post data from that. And I'm just going to check for the presence of the keys that I've defined up here as the input fields that I added to that overall form. Now, assuming that is present, then all I'm going to do is I'm going to run the update post meta, and I'm going to give it a metadata field name, and I can name this any way I want to. It is convention to put an underscore before that, but it is really up to you at the end of the day. It's just a nice way to make sure that it doesn't conflict with primary fields. And then I'm obviously going to pass in the value. So essentially, we're sending in the post ID that we're getting from the save post ID, that we're getting from the save post hook. And then I'm giving the key that I want to save it as, and I'm just saving my data, again, making sure that you sanitize well. All right, and that's it. That's all it takes. And now with that kind of in place, anytime I go and change my data and then hit update, it's creating a form submission and save, and I've got my latest information there. So all is good and all is well. And we can go ahead and also add another one, and we'll call it new superbook. Some fun stuff. You, the listener, and some freaky bunch of numbers. And we're still going to stick to the horror category because of my favorite kind of category. Now, if we've got that, so it's all good, it's all working. If I go to my all books, I've got all of this information here. And if I post that out, it's still going to work. I'm going to get the category of my slug, the new superbook. And I also have the ability to also now create those with my genre, horror categories that I've defined earlier. So all nice and dandy. Now, the next part of this, however, is these columns, because these don't show up by default. You're only going to get, for example, your title and your date. So if you want these additional columns, you need to tell WordPress that you want them there. So let's get into that. Now, depending how far you want to go with this, there's pretty much 4 things that you want to do. 2 you need to do, and 4 that you might want to do if you want to add sortability. So firstly, just like we did with the posts, with the custom post types and the custom taxonomies, our first step is to register that with the system. But registering that does not tell it what to do with it, what to show. So once we've told it how to register it, then we can tell it how to actually render that information. But then that alone, it'll render the information, but that's not going to let us be able to do anything to it. So if we want to actually sort that, we've got to run a function to tell WordPress to sort that function, or at least give us the option to sort it. And then we also need another function that if a user actually does click on those, depending on which column they click, that we reorder that master query that we were talking about earlier for this custom type. So these are things that are pretty simple. So let's get into them. Okay, so firstly, adding a column is pretty quick. We need the manage _post type posts _ So essentially, you're using this as we're using books here as the placeholder for whatever our post type is that we've created if it's not the normal posts. So whatever, if it was kittens, then it would be manage _kittens _post _columns. And then you would simply pass in your function. Now, again, this is, again, a filter. And as you know from filters, we're getting in the data of a filter, and we can then manipulate that data. So all we're going to be doing here is we're going to pass in the value, which is the columns that we're getting alongside that. And because we're getting columns, and the columns is an array, we can go ahead and we can go add new values onto those columns, and then essentially just give them names. Now, this creates the names. It doesn't necessarily tell us what's really inside of those names. All we're doing is we're filtering the data that's coming back to the UI. All right, so what we want to do in that case, but the beauty is now we've got kind of keys assigned to those values, so we actually can do something with that in the next step. So our next step would be firing off the custom columns. So now that we've actually gone ahead and ran a filter for the custom columns, there's a hook on that, which is the manage, whatever your post type is, post custom columns. Okay, so that again, we got manage your post type, posts _columns to get the filter to filter against and modify the rows that we're getting. And then we've got an action that actually fires off that, which is manage your post type, post _custom columns. And again, we do have the ability to manage priority and parameters that we can get from that. So we're going to get 2 parameters out of that. Firstly, I want to get, because we're kind of running that as we go through that array of list items. So I want to know, firstly, I want to know what the column is that I'm on. And secondly, I want to know what the post ID is in the row that I'm in. So with that information available, I can do a simple switch statement on the column, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to echo the value back. So now, essentially, I'm echoing out the value, and the way I'm getting it, because I've got the post ID, I'm using the get _post _meta, passing in my ID, the key that I'm looking for. And if you remember from earlier, I want a flat value. I don't want an array. And I'm doing the exact same thing when this fires off around my book ISP. And again, these are the names that I've now passed into that list. So again, first step, I'm filtering that list. I'm by adding and injecting my columns names. And then I'm listening essentially on that hook for those column names. And I'm just fetching the actual metadata that I want to show against that post ID. Okay, and that's it. That is what really gives me now the ability to actually see the authors and the ISBN or any other of ones that I have. So now in order to make those actually sortable, I want to jump in on the manage_edit dash my post type underscore sortable columns. That's the filter that's going to give me the access to the filters at the top. So within that, I'm going to get the columns, and all I'm going to do is the same thing I've done before. I'm just going to pass in these items so it knows which ones to show that little sortable option for at the top. Now that I've got that, again, I'm going to find the corresponding action hook, which is the pre-get posts. Because remember, there's a main query running on this the moment that page loads. Same as what happens in your posts or any of the other sections or any of your other post type, that initial query then runs. So I'm going to commandeer that query before it happens. Now that I know somebody has clicked on a key that I've now defined, and now I can do some logic around that. And it's quite simple. All I have to do then is, again, I'm getting the pre_get posts, and then I'm doing a little bit of checking here. So firstly, I'm checking if it's not in the admin and this is not the main query of the page, then just return, don't do anything. But if we are in those sections, then, and the post type is equal to my post type, which is the one we defined earlier called book, so that'll be whatever yours is defined. Then I'm going to I'm going to create an order by, and I'm going to say the query, because I'm getting the query as part of this, and I'm going to find the get order by, and then depending on the choice, right? So depending on what I'm actually getting. So anyway, again, the way I know this is if I look at my logic here, and I say author, for example, and I select author, when I go up to the queries, I can see this is a get string. So you can see there's the first definition post type is books, order by book author at, so that's a get, not a post. So you can at any time kind of look at that and see what the values are that you're passing in. And if your first filter actually worked, to kind of inject those ones at the top when I clicked on those ones. Now, with that done, I can use query_get to get that order by get variable that was passed over. And from that, I can use that in order to see if that order by, and again, just so it's very obvious, the order by is indeed the book author, or whichever one it is, right? Because if I'm going to do this for ISBN, that's going to change now, order by is book ISBN. So based upon that, whether it's that or that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the master query. So I'm setting the meta key on that query to my key, and I'm saying that we need to order it by whatever the value is that returns from that. So hence I'm setting the order by based upon the value of what I've gotten from that one. Okay, so that's it. That's all you need to do to kind of get those items sorted out for you, to get that going. And it's that simple to make your own custom post types and your own custom taxonomies, and also to make sure that that stuff still functions in the front end in a normal way. That way you can also remove, but I think now you also understand how you can remove columns that don't make sense and add ones that do make sense, and kind of also customize the queries based upon user roles. Maybe you don't even want people with a lower privilege rank to see certain types of posts based upon the type that they are. Right, I hope this was useful. I'll see you back at the desk. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, please give me some ideas on how I can improve that, or subjects that you love to hear about. And if yourself looking for a mentor in this space, or if you're looking for, a partner on that big next level, or a company that can do these things for you, to cross-brand all different types of technologies, I'm your guy. Hit me up. Information's down below, and let's keep that conversation going if you're interested. And I will see you in the next episode. Please, again, remember this is part of a series, so links down below.